See, this conversation I've always enjoyed, but it's always been incredibly confounding to me because I am a man who pursues definitive answers. I have no problem with conjecture. It's fun. Yeah. I love debates. You're right, I'm right. You're wrong, I'm wrong. Subjectivity, it's all good. But when you discuss something for over a decade, eventually I'd like to get an answer, and eventually we will. We won't get it today.
Nope.
But in your opinion, the former player, a guy who was a borderline Hall of Famer himself, who would have been a Hall of Famer, no doubt, and probably still will be, who would have been a no-doubt Hall of Famer if my partner didn't retire early, there's no doubt he's in Canton, period. But as a guy who played the game at a really high level, when you look at Rivers, do you see a Hall of Fame quarterback?
Well, so it's a nuanced question because, in short, the answer is yes. But when is the question? Now, he's got a lot of peers who have accomplished a lot more than he does.
Such as?
Two of whom were in his draft class,
Yep. Ben
Roethlisberger and Eli Manning. Now, you can say Phillip Rivers is a better quarterback than Eli Manning, but at the end of the day, the narrative around Hall of Fame quarterbacks is what did you do in big games and in big moments, and or were you an MVP, or were you at one time the best player at your position in the National Football League? And maybe Phillip can say that about the last one. I was the best player at my position, but it's highly debatable, BT. He never got deep into the postseason, never passed the divisional round. He has been in the postseason twice since 2009, BT. But he does have the numbers, right? He just passed Dan Marino for 5th all time. He's actually ahead of Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger on the yards list. And so when you look at it all, you'll say, yeah, look, he's got the numbers to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, Dan Marino's a Hall of Famer. He never won a Super Bowl, but at least he got to one. Phillip has never.
And by the way, and I know you know this, there's no comparison between the two.
Oh, of course
Marino's
not.
10 times as good as Rivers.
Of course not. I mean, if Dan Marino was playing now, he'd have 3 million passing yards. I'm serious. Yeah. Think about it, because look how many yards he threw. He was the first person to throw for 5,000 yards when everybody else was throwing for 3,300.
That's right.
So if he was playing now, they'd be throwing for 6,000 yards a season with Dan Marino. I completely agree with you. But the facts are the facts.
Yeah.
He just passed Dan Marino for 5th all time on the passing list. So those numbers will put him in. But he's not getting in before Big Ben, or certainly not Peyton, because Peyton's already been retired for 2 years. In 3 years, he's going to have his green jacket on, right? Not before Aaron, not before Eli, not before Drew Brees. There's just a long list of his peers that are going to go in before him. Does he eventually get in? Yeah, I think so. But it's hard to say it with conviction. Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. It's more like, yeah, okay, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Yeah, I kind of lean on things specific to this argument. I'm a big believer in trusting what you've seen. Don't get me wrong. I've got it in front of me as well. ProFootballReference.com.
Right.
I see the bold yards per attempt, 3 straight years. Led the league in picks a couple of years. Led the league in percentage a couple of years in yards. I get it. 8-time Pro Bowl. Anybody could regurgitate stuff that's in front of them.
Right.
I look at this stuff, right? And this used to get me in trouble in New York because I was always saying, Eli's not a Hall of Famer. Although I would always eventually concede, based on the 2 championships, that he would get in. But my premise was always, and this is certainly more about Rivers than Eli. I don't need to reset the whole Eli thing. But my premise was always then, and it applies now, although the answer is different. When people would say, how is Eli not a Hall of Fame? He's done this. And listen, use your eyes. All the years you've watched football, all the years you've sat back, and especially the last 10 years or so with the red zone and fantasy football. How many times were you now, quarterbacks don't get drafted nearly as high as they used to unless you have a bad league and they don't know what they're doing. And you get running backs, you get receivers, blah, blah, blah. But how
Lamar
many times
Jackson or Kyler Murray?
Yeah. Or one of the 3 tight ends who's really going to put up big numbers. You know how to draft. But how many times are you at a fantasy draft with your buddies the last decade, last 15 years, because Eli's obviously retired, the last 15, where Eli Manning was in demand, or the person who drafted Eli Manning, they were like, oh, man, I got Eli, I'm pumped. That never happened once.
No.
Not once, right?
Yeah, you're right. I'm not sure it happened many times with Phillip Rivers either.
Well, I would now flip it and say, okay, so you got that little fantasy visual. Now, how about the red zone visual? How about you sitting on your couch for the better part of a decade, game to game, they're flipping for you. Hansen doing a great job. And, hey, let's go to San Diego. Phillip Rivers knocking on the door. Chargers trying to put up a quick 7. And like you're watching the whole league, right? And during that time, encapsulating well over a decade, I know myself, I thought many times Phillip Rivers is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah.
I never once thought that about Eli. And it's an amazing battle that I wage within myself, quite frankly, because I know you're a quarterback. Did you win? Mm-hmm. And did you get to the big game? And when you get there, what did you do? Eli got to the big game. He never lost, and he always won the MVP, whereas the complete antithesis is you got better numbers, but he never even got there. So it's not a tough argument, but it's a frustrating argument because in my heart, I think that Sunday to Sunday, Phillip Rivers was better than Eli Manning.
Yeah, but
in the totality, it's Eli.
Yeah, you're right, and because that doesn't matter, and that's the unfortunate thing about the Hall of Fame. BT is it doesn't matter who the better player was. Right, it matters, especially for quarterbacks. It matters who the more accomplished player
a lot of times
was, and that's why it's frustrating because
especially since you can't control.
That's right.
A lot of the variables.
Right. It's like what's around him. Yeah. You know what I mean? Does his best player get hurt, as Antonio Gates did like every single year the last couple of years that he was in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Los Angeles? And so the better player isn't always the one that gets the most celebrated, and a lot of the awards that you rely upon to be the tiebreaker, like the MVP or an All-Pro. Phillip Rivers never made an All-Pro team. How about that? He never made an All-Pro. Made 8 Pro Bowls, but never made an All-Pro.
No, neither is Eli.
Yep, but those are subjective. At the end of the day, it's subjective.
Yeah, but they're usually right. They're usually a good barometer.
If you're picking a quarterback and you're say last season you're picking a quarterback, who's first team All Pro? Is it Pat Mahomes or is it?
It would have been Lamar.
Is it Lamar Jackson? And this
Lamar,
year, is it Ben Roethlisberger or is it
Josh Allen?
Josh Allen or is it Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray? Like who is it? It's subjective. It comes down to like a moment, but that moment in decision making determines someone's legacy, especially when you start having these conversations, if they're good enough, 10, 15, however many years down the line when they're retired. And that's the issue with Phillip Rivers. When it came to that moment to make that decision about him being amongst the elite with accolades, with the hardware, he never was a part of the conversation. And again, I think he's a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. I just think he's going to be one of those guys that's waiting to get into the Hall of Fame because his peers, and maybe it's just because he came in the league at the wrong time. His peers were so accomplished around him that were playing, with him, and now some of them are still playing. Past him a little bit.
I'll co-sign that statement. I'm with you. I think we kind of start differently, but we wind up on the same path. I think that's well said. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to be notified when we drop fresh content.